Guess who got brands talking? Brandlive.co.za.
You're listening to Inside OUTA.
Welcome to Inside OUTA, our weekly podcast that gives you insight at how we at OUTA promote civil activism by tackling conversations that drive our democracy further. I'm your host, Bernadette, and we welcome our listeners back to our podcast in 2019. Today, we have our first podcast with our newly installed executive, Dr. Heinrich Vollmink. Welcome, and it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Bernadette, and thank you for having me on the show.
Awesome stuff. We speak to Heinrich about the elusive South African dream. This, of course, on the backdrop of the State of the Nation address. As we're looking forward to listening to that tomorrow. Stay tuned.
Harnessing the power of talk radio. Brandlive.co.za.
Less corruption, more accountability. Stay tuned to Inside OUTA.
Dr. Heinrich, or Mr. H as I call you, thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you.
Now, the American dream speaks of the land of opportunity and holds the possibility of delivering those arriving on American soils from rags to riches. However, post-apartheid South Africa also has a dream, and it's founded on a promise of a rainbow nation and a new dispensation in which diversity is celebrated and opportunities equal. What would you say about the South African dream? Are we living up to it?
Well, thank you, Bernadette. I think that's a great question, and a question on many minds in our country at this stage. We are so far into our democracy, and yet we do feel like there is a dream deferred.
Yeah.
It's interesting you spoke about the American dream. I was born here in our home country, South Africa, but I spent a lot of my childhood in the States.
Yes.
And one of the first speeches I said as a young kid in the First Baptist Church in Ithaca, in upstate New York, was "I Have a Dream" by Martin Luther King.
Yes.
And in that dream, he speaks about the fact that he has a dream that one day his children will live in a country where they're not judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And I think that in many ways captures the spirit of what we've been trying to build in our country.
Sure.
A country where we understand the injustices of the past, we understand the inequalities and the systematic disparities that still persist in our society, but we strive for a country in which we have true unity in a way that we haven't yet discovered. So I think that we have made steps, though. It's not as if we haven't seen great changes in our country. We came out of a nightmare, which was apartheid. We fought our way through that. And we've now moved into a dispensation where we have a constitution, we have a democracy, we have freedoms that were hard fought for and many died for, that we're experiencing. And we have a hope that we can pass on to generations going forward because of this. And so, it's not all doom and gloom, but we are not where we should have been, and we're certainly not where we could be. And I think it's the gap between the promises of the Constitution and where we currently are that does cause it to become a bit nightmarish at times for many.
And I think when you talk about the nightmarish or the dream deferred, it's really been corrupted by personal interest, corruption, private gain, entitlement, a vicious contempt for the poor and the common good. Do you believe that there's an opportunity to change this around? What is your view on that?
I think there is. Again, it comes back to where we've been and what we've come through as South Africans.
Yeah.
If we could find the collective strength to overcome the monster of apartheid, then we can slay the current giants of corruption. It is something that is very doable given the strength that we have as a nation. We need to be reminded of that, of course, and that's why civil society is so important. But when we look at what's happening currently with the Zondo Commission, for example, and the constant sort of unveiling of new levels of corruption, it does become quite overwhelming. It seems like that giant is huge, and so what we need to do is brace ourselves as citizens. And first and foremost, it's about citizens taking action and not just look outside to leaders to take us there, but us as citizens to actually become active and engage with us. And that's what we're doing here at OUTA. And that's what many other good organizations are doing.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, yes, I think we can overcome this, but we can only overcome it working together.
You talked about slaying a giant, and that kind of brings the analogy of David and Goliath analogy, where, it's civil society, or I think as a nation, we always look to government to fix it, and it's this big giant that is actually the problem right now, right? Tell me about your background and why did you join OUTA? I mean, from what I know, you are an actual doctor. Why did you get into this space?
Sure, that's a very big question. Well, firstly, just in terms of my background, yes, I'm a medical doctor. I'm a specialist in public health medicine, which looks at not just individual patients, but how populations actually have health challenges and how we can overcome those. So it's something that is fundamental to how I operate in this world, and that is being first and foremost a public servant, because I trained in public hospitals, and so being a doctor is about serving, and so that is fundamental to what I'd hope to do here in OUTA. I think coming back to how I've got here, look, there was a journey, and maybe if I can just share one experience. As a young trainee doctor, it was in my third year of medicine, I had an experience that put me on the road to public engagement, and public service.
Yeah.
I was doing an introductory block in pediatrics. You do that in your undergrad, and I had just moved out from the classrooms and the labs. So for one of the first times wearing my white lab coat and the stethoscope, and not knowing how the thing actually works, but feeling really good that I can kind of save the world with this.
Yes.
And then was completely undone by a really tragic case that I saw. I was leaving the ward, and as I left on this bed, there was this young, must have been a 6-month-old little girl who clearly had end-stage AIDS, who had quite a chest infection. So her chest was going up and down and up and down and up and down as she was struggling and fighting for each breath. All these tubes and pipes keeping her alive. And I looked at her, and everything in the room kind of just dissolved in that moment. And there was a sense of almost hopelessness. How is it that this child, who just came into this world, now has to fight this disease that most likely took her life?
Sure.
And I remember making a commitment at that point to say, we need to fight for a future in which this is no longer possible, in which our children do have a fighting chance, a real chance at living the kind of life that we dream up for them, as opposed to that nightmare. And I made that commitment in my heart, and soon after that found my way into student politics as a way of that being expressed.
Sure.
And from there going into politics eventually, and serving in that space. But then I see my journey into civil society as a continuation of that path, where now I'm working with other citizens to make sure that, again, these kind of nightmare scenarios don't occur.
I really like the journey that you've taken, and it really talks to what you're talking about, your authentic self of serving the nation and serving. I would think that it would be easier to stay in government to serve. You left government to come to civil society to make a change. What a bold move, and why?
Wow. You're not making it easy.
I'm not supposed to.
But it's good. It's a good question, and I'm happy to answer it.
Sure.
Politics is a very difficult space to work in our country at this moment in time. It's one in which there are a lot of partisan interests that pull people this way and that. And we are still a young democracy, so we do need to give ourselves a little bit of breathing space. I mean, I think it'll take a while before we have a truly mature democratic system. And we will get there. I mean, but where we are right now is one in which there isn't really the contestation of ideas in the political sphere. There's simply my position versus your position, and we can't find each other. We struggle to find each other.
Sure.
And it's so ideologically laden that we've forgotten that it's actually about the people. And I did become a bit frustrated with that. It was an honor to serve. It was a tremendous honor to serve as a member of parliament and in the provincial legislature.
Sure.
And it's something that I certainly would count as one of the greatest experiences I've had in my life. But the frustration of not being able to actually get to the root of what citizens want.
Because you're so into policies of the party that you're with, right?
Absolutely. And that sways you and it skews you. And it also doesn't allow for the kind of interaction I feel we need, where people from different viewpoints, from different vantage points can actually come together and together can actually see a whole picture, as opposed to fighting about who has the actual accurate view when we're all looking at the same thing, but just from different perspectives. I believe civil society creates that kind of space, which is why for now I've moved from the world of politics into the world of civil society, where we can actually engage together.
Okay. Thank you so much for that, Heinrich. Let's just take a break and we'll get back into it.
Harnessing the power of talk radio. brandlive.co.za.
Demand good governance. Join us weekly on Inside OUTA.
Welcome back. You're tuned in with Bernadette at Inside OUTA. We're speaking to Dr. Heinrich, who's our executive here at OUTA, and we've been delving into some very deep questions. And I want to bring the conversation back to the State of the Nation address. Now, before we went into the break, Heinrich, you spoke about the Dream Deferred. The State of the Nation talks about, is very positive. Every year we get to see, oh, wow, I actually didn't know that South Africa is actually going into that direction. And it's almost an elusive dream. It's almost as if it's not real. Would you say that?
Well, I think that it is a great and aspirational dream that our Constitution articulates. It is not an impossible dream. Again, people would have argued, going back to the earlier point, that overcoming apartheid was impossible, but we did it. And so we can create the dream that the Constitution casts for us. But what is required in the first instance is an honest look at where we are. Because, I come from medicine, and in medicine you need a proper diagnosis before you can come up with a cure. So we need to have a proper diagnosis of where we are as a nation and what gap exists, again, between the constitutional promises and where we currently stand. And only when we've honestly looked at that, I believe that we can move forward. And that's what the State of the Nation, in many ways, is supposed to be, is a reflection of where we are, the state of the nation. It's
whether positive or negative.
Whether positive or negative. It certainly isn't a space for campaigning, for politicking. It is a space for leadership, for saying this is our preferred version of the future, this is where we are, and this is how we're going to get there. And so I think that the President has a huge task ahead of him as he goes onto the podium in the House to speak to the nation. I do feel that there are many issues that if he doesn't speak to, it wouldn't be an accurate reflection of where we are.
Okay, I hear you. In terms of the project that we pursue as an organization, Undoing Tax Abuse, what are we hoping to see, or what specific things do we hope that President Cyril Ramaphosa addresses in this State of the Nation?
Well, certainly the plague of corruption that has so permeated so many parts of state and so many parts of our society. This needs sort of a deep sort of cleaning and healing for us as a nation. So it means that he needs to say, well, this is what we've seen, for example, in the Zondo Commission. This is what we're seeing as more and more cases are breaking, and it is not at all going to be a part of our future. We need to see it, and now we need to act. And so we'd hope that he would, for example, in the State of the Nation address, speak about the launching of investigations, even as the Zondo Commission is continuing. Stefanie Fick, who heads up our legal department, has made this point, and it's critical. And that is, we don't have to wait for the Zondo Commission or any inquiry to finish. We can actually launch investigations as things are unfolding. And it shows that we're taking active steps to deal with this deep-rooted corruption. I'd hope, or we'd hope, that he'd make bold pronouncements on the type of investigations that will be carried out, that he could instruct around corruption, and that it would be done without prejudice, without fear, without favor.
Well, I'm quite excited to hear what the president has to say. I mean, last year when he came into that seat as the president, he had, I think it was a week or two before, and he had to step into the shoes of a president. So we're quite interested to hear what he has to say.
Can I just maybe just add to that,
yes.
and to say that, you know, one of the important things that he needs to communicate is that, or remind us of, is that corruption is not a victimless crime. That when you have corrupt health officials, you have clinics that don't work and hospitals that fall apart. When you've got corrupt educators, and there are many good educators and there are many good health professionals, but those few ones that are corrupt, you then in education robbing children of their future because you're not giving them the education they need. Corrupt cops. We then have victims across communities that shouldn't be victims because they aren't being protected because money that should have gone to law enforcement is going elsewhere. So I think he needs to bring back in a very powerful and personal way how corruption affects our lives in the everyday.
Oh, absolutely. I think one needs to definitely understand that it's not a crime where you can just get away with and there's no victims, there's no casualties. There definitely are casualties. And we're seeing that in our unemployment rate, we're seeing it in our education system. I mean, South Africa's education is one of the worst on the continent, and it's things that we need to address. I think it's 24, 25 years into democracy. There are strides that can be made. There are things that can change. So absolutely agree with you. Heinrich, can you share with our supporters your role here at OUTA and how you hope to contribute to our team?
Sure. Well, my role is to head up the National Government Division as the executive head. And what that means is that all the work that we're doing with national portfolios, so transport and energy and water and state capture, and looking at newer areas now in health and education, I would need to oversee the portfolio heads in those respective areas. And that means identifying projects that are meaningful to the public and to our supporters, that are meaningful to communities because they're affected by, for example, corruption in those areas. But we're also looking at ways in which you can offer solutions. So not just saying, well, let's fight corruption, we must, but how can we support the good people in security, the good people in health, the good people in education? A great example we have is Yamkela, who heads up our water and sanitation, has introduced this wonderful idea of an independent water regulator, and is working with Water Shortage South Africa to actually drive a strong agenda around a very good solution to ensure that we have water security. And so those are the kind of projects we're also looking at as we continue our fight against corruption.
It's definitely a collaborative approach to seeing South Africa better, hey?
Absolutely, and that's what we need. And I think that's key to where we're going.
I hear you. Heinrich, do you have any parting words of encouragement for those who want to join our movement?
Well, yes, just to say, I mean, let's go back to the American dream you spoke about earlier, and the South African dream that we own. One of the great American presidents, John F. Kennedy, said, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Right?
Yes.
And so the challenge will be to citizens, is to say, how do we build our country? Yeah. And civil society offers us a place to do that. It puts the country first. It pulls on the strengths that we have as communities across our nation. And so I just want to encourage anybody who's listening to find a cause in this country, and there's so many, one that you believe in, one that you're passionate about, one that will help build our beautiful nation, and then just to go for it. And we'll certainly be there to support you as much as we can.
Wow. Thank you so much for your time, Heinrich. We look forward to having more robust conversations here at Inside OUTA.
Thank you, Benedict.
Well, thank you for joining us today on Inside OUTA. Join us next week as we engage in more conversations that drive our democracy further.
Thanks for listening to Inside OUTA. Tune in next week when we delve deeper into undoing tax abuse.
Harnessing the power of talk radio. Brandlive.co.za